The irony of today's debate is I'm a strong Nkrumahist, but today I lead a delegation to invade one of his beloved African countries. And I intend to prove two things: why the supposed African country of his is unrecognizable, and therefore we need to solicit help to rescue that particular depleting country. In my debate, I'll be very specific, just so it's an IR motion. A lot of people don't lie anyhow. It is very, very important, right? So I'm going to show two things: the urgency and the state of Sudan at the moment and why we need intervention. But secondly, what will be in the interest of Quad, which is an interest I represent in today's debate. And third, how we will reach better outcomes for the people and the citizens of Sudan. First things first, how does Sudan look like at the moment? It looks like a country
They do not enter this war senselessly to fight themselves to death. They enter these wars because they have interest that must be fulfilled for them to stop. What is this to say? Unless those interests are stopped, no amount of invasion, no amount of anything that you do will lead these people to stop. That is the very core and spirit of the debate. 4 questions that will be answered in the debate. 1, what is the real problem? 2, is there a better alternative? 3, why an invasion is worse? And lastly, for the actors, why this just makes everything worse for them. Starting with the necessity and what even caused the war. The thing is this. He says one is bandit. He says one controls the nation. He says one is a coward. But the most true thing, the truest thing in all his speech is that these two people worked side by side. They worked to oust a very corrupt government. What is that to say? The interest that they have is that they want to transition the country from how corrupt it was to make it a very better country for people to live in. This is seen when they've agreed that in the coming years, they would willfully hand over power to other people. But currently, they are seizing power from the people who once had it, and they are going to transfer. What then is the cause of the issue that is going on? The cause of the issue that is going on is because the bigger guy now realizes that the bandit soul that he calls now has a lot of resources, now has a lot of men, and can be able to not seek to his interest. The thing on the other side too is because they are transitioning and that the bigger guy will become the army general leader in fear of persecution, in the fear that these people will capitulate and let them go, in the fear that these people will not transition them into the army and they will lose everything that they once had, is the reason why they also do not trust these guys. What have we established? 1, there will be a democracy at the day. But 2, the interest these two people have is that currently one doesn't trust the other because they've gained manpower, they've gained resources, and the other person too doesn't trust because of the fear of persecution and things that they have done. What is the most better alternative in the debate? The best alternative that will willfully defend is diplomacy. Why is diplomacy going to be the best alternative in the debate? 1, because we have precedents where in the middle of wars, people have been stopped to cause an immediate ceasefire so that negotiations can be made, so that people can be brought forth, so that they can actually have a conversation to stop all the bad things that they have. What does this look like? 3 things that are going to make this very efficient. For the Quad, they have the most economic power. What does that look like? Sanctioning, not giving them food at all. Actually, not giving them food at all, going directly to the leaders of these groups, which looks like holding their bank accounts at stake, which looks like making sure that the things that they need as the leaders do not come to them and the political people. 2, they have diplomatic power. What does it look like? In the Afghanistan war, after all the invasion, it took diplomacy for these guys to leave and even hand over this thing. Why do we think that this is very important? When this happens, it can lead to an immediate ceasefire where these people can then negotiate their interests and how best do it. As to how we mechanistically prove how ceasefire can be done, it can just be how they have the top-notch generals who are focused in all these international relations and can make this work. Do we have precedents? Yeah, the Liberian war, the invasion of Afghanistan that failed, that had to resort to diplomacy and all other things. Why do we think an invasion is worse for everyone else in that regard? 1, because an invasion means that there's going to be elongation of that war. What does that look like? He says, and by the analysis, that these guys have a lot of manpower on both sides. What does that look like? For these guys to engage with that, they need to bring as much people. They need to bring as much people to enter. What is happening as a 2-side war between 2 people now becomes a 3-way war between all these guys. What does this mean? All the fears, everything that is seeking to stop now becomes times 3. The second structural reasons is that these people are venturing into unknown terrain. What does that look like? The people there, the countries that they like, the infrastructure that they already have, the sort of national resources they have, and everything they've amassed all over the past are for them. Why is it at the disadvantage of the Quad? Because people like America have entered those zones and they've not worked well. Presidents of Libya, etc., they do not have any strategic power there to have any actor. They've already been distrusted. That is the first thing. But secondly, also that these people will not have anything that stops them. What stops these rebels from using human beings as human shields to stop the war? What does that mean? In the effort to actually stop that in an invasion, it will lead to an offshoot or something like actually hurting human lives more. The third reason is to say that previous actions have proven to not work. Panel, no single invasion in the last 50 years has worked. I dare everyone to check their phones, to check the internet, to prove that there's no precedence in the last 50 years of any invasion working. What is that to say? Because people have the manpower, they have the resources, etc. They are already distrusted actors. I'll prove why it is strategically worse for these guys, and on the mechanisms that we give, it is better for them. Closing. Sure, when you come, just come and prove that. It's simple. When you come and prove it to you, I dare you. Next thing is that, see, but now, why this worsens the image of these actors? Why is this very important? The country America has been the largest exporter of war, and the whole country is criminally got to be held liable for exporting war to all those people. What does that look? In Libya, the stakes were high. In Afghanistan, the stakes were high. In Pakistan, the stakes were high. In Liberia, the stakes were high. In South Sudan, the stakes were high. All these people did was fill them from one time to the other. What does that mean? In the very minuscule and very small instant that these guys fail, it further deepens their image as people who are warmongers, of people who do not want to do anything better for these guys. This thing is talk about how this is a chance for them to clear their image. This is the only real chance for these people to engage in something that is not war, to actually achieve something that they want. What is this to say? This is the most important time that they can take that thing away. Things like, what's the name? Even the Saudi Arabia people, because they are people that continuously trade with the West. Every other Muslim Arabic country in that zone doesn't agree to them. That is why they are losing their relevance to countries like Iran, Iraq, etc. in that zone. People like UK associating with these guys when they already have anti-monarchy and anti-state issues in their country rising, leaving Brexit, etc. where the people already do not trust them. When these people are already left-leaning and internally looking for you to engage in war is very bad. The way that exists, engaging in war brings much more things like losing resources, etc., etc. But then even if they win and they succeed in the invasion, this is why it is bad. China has a narrative, and other people are looking to topple the global power that is USA. Even if they win, these are the bad guys. They still went to war. We are the good people. Side with us. At the end of the day, they'll still go and engage people like China, etc. Because people would be hurt, and they do not want their governments to be trading with USA, etc. at the end of the day. Even if the invasion succeeds, it further worsens the image of the USA. Thank you.
Shout outs to all KDO23 OCOM members for the great work you guys have supported me in doing so far. Koka, Malik, Alexandra, Belinda, Eranto, Aisha, Selord, Benchok, have I left anyone? Victor, Halima, Ore, have I left anyone? Who? Hanif. Who else? Philip. Who else? Who? Alexandra. I've mentioned Alexandra. All right, that's fine. So, and then, thank you so much, Cap, for the wonderful tournament. Wesley, Caleb, and Vincent. A special thank you to Salma, Adobia, Pinka, Donald, Scarecrow for the great support. And a big thank you to all of you for making this tournament a big one. See you in KDO 2024. Right, so I'm going to start soon, but today is not going to be one of the days we are going to lose from OG. Definitely not. So I'll take closing only if you guys are going to take us. You take me and it's a contract. I'm not taking you guys. Unless you're going to take me, Papa. But if you don't, okay, that's fine. It's transactional. If you don't take me, then I'm not taking you. Don't ask. Yeah.
Don't cry.
Don't worry. All right. So starting my speech in X, Y, Z. Two things AFT tells you which are very important. One is the urgency of this situation. Two is the characterization. I'll show you why the bulk of the cases Dovlo tells you, in fact, every single thing, has been dealt with by AFT and why those things do not run. Because what AFT argues to you is that there is an urgency for which this should be done. One is the fact that these guys are too powerful, and he does a vast number of analysis to it to show you that they have a lot of resources and support. I'll do more of that. what Dovlo's response to that is, because these guys are so powerful, it means that the invasion won't work because they have equal amount of power. What AFT argued to you is to show you that the amount of power they have means that they can continually fight against each other, and I'll show you more incentive to do that. But what that means is that the power that these guys hold only needs an extra equal force to fight it. That is having 4 of these countries powerful in all senses to be able to invest resources into fighting them. If you want them to stop what they are doing, you need equal or more power to be able to stop them. But secondly, all these Sudanese are suffering. So Dovlo says this is going to make it worse. They are going to die more. They are going to die more whatsoever. The suffering is already existent. If at the end of the day, we are going to be able to worsen the case, we agree, by killing more people through the intervention, but at least interventions are more reasonable and more structured and planned, other than the alternative of what they are doing, right? We think that once they are more reasonable and we still consider that some people might die, it's better off because at the end of the day, I'll show you why the fight would at the end of the day stop. They don't have a structured way of fighting. At least we have a more planned 4 nations to be able to intervene. We think that it's better off in our world. But the characterization of these individuals is very important, and I'll do more. Let's start with principled argumentations and why we think that it's the interest of Quad to be able to do this. Because the info slide clearly says that they've had extreme support from civilians, right? It means that by de facto, there has been a mandate transferred from civilians to be able to support them to overthrow a certain president who was corrupt. The assumption is that they trusted that these individuals are going to make lives better. In principle, it means that there is a breach of contract between these said individuals and the citizens that we are all concerned about. AFT characterizes you the interest of the actors and shows you why the citizens are a pivotal interest of these states, because the refugees would end up going to Saudi Arabia, US has had that interest whatsoever. It means that once there is a breach, we supported you to overthrow to make things better, and you are now fighting. There's all the alienation of mandate is a reason why this intervention has to be taken. But secondly, on the harm principle, which is very important, because Sudan is going to suffer because they need resources to, at the end of the day, invest into refugees. They never know when they are going to stop coming. The US is constantly going to suffer for the sad interest they have in countries like Sudan to be able to have a long-term gains, right? All these individuals are going to lose out. We think that that's harm being exerted on them because of the particular actions that are being taken by Sudan. It's a reason why the intervention should be taken at the end of the day. They need to show why these countries are not harmed in any way and why they should sit in that regard. Then there's huge ideological inconsistency because these guys had an incentive of supposedly helping out. They ended up making things worse. We think that they need to be dealt with in that regard, right? Why would alternatives not work? Diplomacy. First thing, because the socialization of these 2 individuals is one that has caused them to be hard individuals who have never gone for any theory of compromise. They are ones that were not rooted in democratic principles that allows them to understand how to compromise with individuals. They are hard-trained militaries who go the extreme of doing things. They are not like militaries in Ghana who understand democracy and when you need to stop. These are people who don't want to allow any power to go beyond their hands. They always want to hold power. That's why they went to the extent of holding up a coup d'etat. So the diplomacies only work if the leaders within the party are ones who understand compromise in the first place. These are people who do not understand the theory of compromise in that regard. But secondly, the huge support they have from civilians is one that forces them to want to continuously do it. Because the info slide said that the civilians continuously are looking for control by the leaders they are supporting. It means that they do not want to look weak in front of the civilians. Read the info slide. They do not want to look weak in front of their leaders, right? It means that once they do not want to look weak, they do not want to give up because they are going to be told that after all you are weak. The last thing any military, hard-trained military man wants to be told is that you gave up power to somebody because you are scared or afraid. The socialization, this is very important, of Sudanese people is one that has never exposed them to anything like compromise or democracy. This is the reason why it's going to be extremely difficult for these people to be diplomatic in any way. But the loss of trust is the next reason why the diplomacies won't work. Because as he said, one is, as AFT said, one is aligned to like the West, another is aligned to whatsoever. They only came together to overthrow for an interest, but they do not trust each other because they know of their alignment to one or the other. If there is a diplomatic call, there's likely that one will think that the US is backing the other, and then the other might be backed by another person. That's and mutual trust that exists between them. It's a reason why one will not want to compromise, because they know that US might never be trusted in that regard when it comes to things like diplomacy, so they do not want to do it in that regard. But to understand this, there's a trend of disloyalty that exists between these people and like these when it comes to diplomacy, because they were asked to cease fire and they continuously breached this 3 consecutive times. It means that they are use Google, guy. They breach power continuously, and that shows disloyalty. It means that they are not ready to go by the book, because it has been done continuously. You talked about precedence. This is precedence. These guys do not go by it. It means that they are not ready to go by things like the book. Understand their socialization and their concept. Closing.
Your burden is to defend specifically a Quad invasion, because on our side, we can also defend an invasion by the United Nations peacekeeping mission.
You are going to defend diplomacy. I'm doing the preemptions literally, right? And I'm showing you AFT did the bulk of the Quad things, but let me still do it. Next thing is the Quad interest and why the Quad needs to intervene in that regard. AFT did that. I'm going to do a couple of new ones in that regard. Because, understand, and this is an international theory principle. The moment to get a nation's interest or loyalty is when they are at their lowest point. So that's why US will intervene in Afghanistan and other countries. Because when people are going through crisis and you intervene and they come out of the crisis, you have their de facto support because they remember the kind of crisis they went through. This is even a normal human principle. If actors like UK, US, and other actors have an interest in that regard, the most important moment is to intervene at this point so that when they are able to relieve of the fight, they get the capture state. Because all these people are selfish. They might be bad people, but they need to be able to do it. The reason why that's even important is because these things hardly happen once in a while. It means that you need to take the opportunity when they happen. It is an interest for them to be able to act within this period of time. It means that it is an interest for all these people to be able to take a certain action in that regard. In the aftermath, we have a growing narrative that US is bad, but this time US has done something better. They will not want to fuck this up because they know that people have bad narratives about them. This time, OG doesn't lose a final because of the impact these people are going to give. We win today.
So he says that there have been a lot of ceasefires and they have not listened to it. That's the first lie, and I hate liars. The war started a month and a week ago. There have never been any ceasefire. There has never been intervention. Your first point of intervention is to invade a place. Please don't lie in today's debate. When you gave a warning at the start of the debate that you shouldn't invade and all the stuff. This current war started just over a month ago. So then, first thing that I'll do in today's debate is on the question of necessity. The premise of military necessity is that it must be a last resort or there must be no alternative, feasible alternative. What this means is that government must establish that all less coercive means have been employed and they have failed or are not possible until they have established that they are losing the debate. In the course of 1 month when this war started, they have not tried any other means, these Quad members in today's debate. It means that there is a window for us to employ all those means, and when they fail, that is when you can justify military intervention. And this is basic international political theory and all those stuff. What this means is that we can argue diplomacy and negotiation, and I don't think our closing can nine fast. They have to be consistent across the bench in that regard. That we also say the impact of diplomacy and negotiation is that you are likely to repair your international image as a warmonger. Every little thing, you are seen as that guy who invades, and countries are beware of you in that regard. That is why his whole case of how they are becoming distrusted in most African countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and co. exists, because they are afraid that these guys are warmongers who, upon the least instigation of trouble within our territory, they come in and all those stuff. What is the one that repairs that image when you do not intervene? At least this one time, you were very patient in that regard. The then is two outcomes that are likely to happen. One, if you lose, it further, what's the name? Worsens your image as a warmonger and also shows how weak you are in terms of intervention. Countries are not likely to fear you and all those stuff. These are things that these countries care about. This is what helps them maintain their international superiority and all those stuff. But secondly, if you win, engaging Franco's case on how if you win, you say that because you are the one who liberated them and because of that they will support you and all those stuff. First, realize if you win like you won in Afghan, there will not be support for you. There will be support for people like Taliban and all those stuff.
Why is this true? They've not analyzed to you the concept of pain. During your invasion, you may have caused pain to one side. There's a whole faction of civilians whose people died and all those stuff. They are the ones also on the losing side. They are losing out on all resources and all those stuff. It means that they will not support the kind of government you put in place for them to, for them to have trade deals with you and all those stuff, because you have caused them pain and all those stuff. They will vote those governments out of power. Those governments have electoral incentive not to let you support America. And because of that, you are likely to resort to China and all those stuff for that thing. It hurts you because China is your greatest enemy. You are empowering them economically with all the resources of Somalia and all those stuff. The next clash in today's debate then is on efficiency. They say that it is likely to succeed because the stakes are high. Well, the stakes were high in every intervention that you went into. The stakes were high in Libya. The stakes were high in Afghanistan. Afghanistan and how they were allowing terrorists within their territory were a national security threat to your citizens. It was from there that we were launching terrorist threats to your citizens and all those stuff. Even when those stakes were high, direct threat to your citizens, you still failed. I don't think then the stakes being high in this instance, when even your citizens are not a threat, means that it will likely succeed in that regard. When the stakes are really, really low, means that you are likely more to fail. But they say that these people are responsible actors. No proof of it. They say they are held into account by international bodies and all those stuff. No proof of it. There's a history of them flouting international rules. But USA has Security Council veto power. So any threat of sanction that are likely, these bodies are likely to attach to these other countries, they will remove it, they will veto it and all those stuff. So that means that responsibility is something that you cannot be assured of in that regard. They say that they are hardcore, they are hard-winded, and because of that, they are not likely to, what's the name, respond to diplomacy and all those stuff. Well, they have already, had negotiations in the past and agreed with themselves. That's why they were able to remove Omar al-Bashir. When their interests met through diplomacy, if you're able to make their interests meet, it means that you are likely to have that agreement once again. I don't think they are senseless. They are so hardwired that they are willing to kill themselves in every regard. But then, why is this likely to fail on your side? When you say that, and Franco's main mechanism is that the war is upended on one side. So you have to bring in an actor who will have equal power to challenge these people. Well, you will not have equal power still. It will still be one that is very, competitive. Why? Because of that same very mechanism he gives. As to the Wagner side which exists in this war, the Wagner side is virtually Russia. When Wagner is involved in every war, it means that Vladimir Putin has an imprimatur on that action. It means that Russia is also an interested actor. So the equal power that you upend is something that is counteracted by the Wagner side, Russia and all those stuff. It means it becomes a much more bigger war. They also have interest. It means they also help them more, and that means that the war will prolong in that regard. More lives, less electricity, less electricity, and all those stuff. Lastly, it's on why diplomacy is likely to succeed. One, it's a question of interest. They are not fighting to death. They are not fighting a senseless death. They were cooperating before. It is when the distrust came that they failed. The law has showed you that in the diplomacy, you are likely to make them sit at the table to agree to these things and all those stuff. Make them sign agreements as to when the transition happens. You include my men in the regular army so that my men will be fed. They will not die and all those stuff. That is all I want. If you're able to give me that assurance, I will capitulate and they will let the transition go and all those stuff. But before that, let me take you.
The problem with your case is that it's very unimaginative and unoriginal.
Yeah, I don't care. We are winning, we are losing a war. We are saving people's life. I don't care about being imaginative. But also, you say that, what's the name? The kind of diplomacy is much more faster. Invasions, history has shown, at most will take 5 years and all those stuff. Diplomacy at least takes a year. If it fails, then we at least resort to that thing. It means that faster means it is on our side. They think that the invasion is a one-day invasion, a one-month invasion, or a one-year invasion, which they will likely win in that regard. But when they talk about a cease, but we also show that even if it fails, the diplomacy fails, during negotiations, there is a ceasefire. That is a window of opportunity to save lives, to correct electricity, and reduce all the agency arguments that you make in that regard. What are other claims that they make? The claims that they make is that Saudi Arabia and how refugees go over there. Well, when you invade and the scale of the war is expanded, it means that there will be more displacement and there will be more refugees going to Saudi Arabia in the contained state of this war right now. And with diplomacy, which will allow them to have a ceasefire, it means that refugee displacement into your Saudi Arabia and whatever is rather reduced in that regard. But the vlog gives you a lot of arguments on how we satisfy the interests of this actor, improve their international image, and how they are able to enjoy trade deals with these people in that regard when they facilitate a diplomatic, engagement that satisfies all interests. We think that this war is going to be senseless. We think that diplomacy is likely to win. If it doesn't win, it has certain benefits that we must at least try before we go this. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Prosper Michael. I would be your member of government for this round. I have very, very great peripheral vision. That means you don't need to say POI, just raise your hand. I can see even with the back of my head. And if I won't take you, I won't take you. It doesn't change anything if you shout, so please don't shout. But equally, unlike you, I'll let you finish the question you want to ask because I respect individuals. So, I won't do a shout out today, so great. I'm starting my speech. Timer. All right, so starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. From side CG, we would not be pacifist in today's debate because there have been several quarrels, several wars that have gone on in Sudan that we can use as grounds upon which to predict how this is going to go. Why do we think that this is important? There has almost been no war in Sudan where a peacekeeping mission or particularly attempts at negotiation has been successful. So if we want to be as silly as Dovlo was in today's debate, just like he said no invasion succeeded, we can also say no negotiation also succeeded. It was not until a complete decapitation of one end of the war that we had a winner. Omar al-Bashir had to be ousted by force. It was not through negotiation. We think that what this means then, but unlike Dovlo, I would actually show you why negotiation will still not fail. I won't depend on precedents because it didn't happen before does not mean that it would not happen now. Invasions could have failed 1,000 times, but today is your lucky day. You might get it to work out. So they don't win the debates just because they say, I dare you, show me an invasion that has succeeded. Today, I'll analyze to you how this invasion will be successful. We think that it's important to recognize also that in 2020, Sudan was flagged as a state that is likely to engage in state-sponsored terrorism. But this is particularly important because they have a large stockpile they don't have a stockpile per se, but one of their most important resources is uranium. So they can create a stockpile which eventually can become one thing that is particularly important in building nuclear weapons. Even if they don't have the resources to build nuclear weapons, they can engage in nuclear trades that is eventually going to strengthen more pariah states. The reason why this is particularly important is because we give you more urgency than these guys do. All they say is that there will be spillover effects. That's actually completely true and quite brilliant, but they don't show you why that's particularly important. We think it's more radical than just spillover effects of a war. But most importantly, we reject the premise that people would die and the invasion will fail. Because these guys say they are okay with people dying in these invasions. We say people would not die, and I'm going to analyze to you how. But most importantly, before we get to how this invasion will be successful, why do we think diplomacy would not work? We think the reason why diplomacy would not work is because diplomacy typically succeeds after both parties of a conflict have prolonged the conflict to a point where they realize that somebody has to give up in a bid to make sure that this thing ends. Like he said, the conflict literally started a month ago. It has not been dragged out. They don't know the full extent of their opposition. They think that the other guy is still weaker. To that extent, they will be unwilling to come to the negotiation table to discuss right now. It's going to be unlikely to have negotiation working out. But secondly, negotiations in the very way they work out demand a trade-off. You cannot have a negotiation where I get everything I want and the other guy gets everything they want. Someone has to lose out in that regard. These two individuals would not be willing to do that because particularly everybody wants full control because there have been discussions that have been had even privately between these two individuals and nothing particularly succeeded in that regard. We think it's very ridiculous for you to claim that you're going to have diplomacy. But realize the importance of their characterization to the extent that Eze does not flag to these guys. If they'll be doing a recharacterization of the debate, they equally have to argue diplomacy. If they argue anything other than that, they are being unfair to OG, and that's not the debate you are willing to have in today's debate. You have to defend diplomacy. They took you, guy. But most importantly, let's discuss the most important burden in today's debate. Unlike other teams, I won't only claim a burden is important,
I'll show you why it's important. The most important burden in today's debate is who gives you the quickest resolution to this conflict. Why is this particularly important? Because of three things. One, the longer the conflict continues, the more you get casualties and spillover effects continuously pouring into many of these states. But secondly, the more the conflict continues, the more radicalized you get Sudan to become. They have the propensity of becoming a pariah state. They already have a lot of instruments that would make it easy for them to become a pariah state. The last thing we should do is to make them actually become a pariah state. But thirdly, we think that you equally lose out on whatever economic viability would necessarily be profitable in the future, because like we are all in freaking post-COVID pandemic. We need as many states who will be fully functional as possible. We think all these things mean this thing needs to end as quickly as possible. But we think for it to end, we need to analyze how we think this invasion is going to be successful. And this is where we win today's debate. We do not think this invasion is going to fail for a couple of reasons. One, we think that invasions no longer take the form of full-blown, like, troops coming into your state. We think drone technology makes it possible for you to specifically target individuals within a state and within a space for you to be able to take them out inadvertently. What this means then is that we don't need to send in troops to cause massive bloodshed and massive eradication of human life. We can get targeted like assassinations and targeted killings of the people who are purporting this evil in this particular space. Secondly, we think American intelligence and network of intel is particularly sufficient enough for us to be able to gather as much intelligence of this particular demography, so much so that guerrilla warfare tactics that can be employed by the opposing side would fail. So it means that we are particularly going to succeed as quickly as possible with the lowest amount of casualties. But thirdly, we think, given that there's a recognition of the fact that the USA has repeatedly failed in previous attempts at invasions, we think even if all the three other states want to fail, the USA will not be willing to fail, because they know how many times idiots on Twitter repeatedly claim that the USA is shit just because they've not succeeded in invasions that they did before. We think that, fourthly, there is little interest in Biden's caucus to create a failure of an invasion so close to an election season. So much so that they'll be forced to have a very, very thorough interaction of these things to make sure that this is going to be successful. Before I continue, closing.
Yeah, so we think that failure is not on your side to decide, right? Because the continuance of the war is not something that you can determine when it's going to end. There's the action of international people that tells you whether it's going to fail or not.
Yeah, but that's the problem. The thing is, to the extent where I can purport that we are going to succeed in an interaction of like invasion, it means that the more likely outcome is what we should opt for. We don't know if they are going to accept negotiation like you claim, but we know that we are going to win if we invade. That makes us the more likely and more probable path to victory in today's debate. But more importantly, why do we think that this is particularly important? We think even before you invade, the threat of an invasion sends shivers down the spine of individuals that particularly want to engage in these spaces. We think that this in of itself is going to make it more willing for them to particularly engage in more reasonable engagement in that regard. But realize that these guys cannot argue that the threat of an invasion in itself is not an invasion. You need to commit to the action of an invasion for you to threaten that you are going to invade. So we still have a better annexation of the gains in this side of the debate. But most importantly, realize that in today's debate, for any side to win, they need to be able to analyze to you how they give you the most probable outcomes. You cannot say it has failed before, so it will fail now. You cannot say that particularly, I dare you, show me something that has worked out. Today, I have analyzed to you how this would work out. You can freaking make me the military general of the USA, because I'm that brilliant.
Okay, so before I begin, I would like to equally give shout-outs. I think I made this trip at a period that was particularly very tumultuous for me personally. So I'd like to give a shout-out to all the new friends that I made here in Ghana. I would also like to give shout-outs to some people who are not here, but probably who are watching. Elisha just joined. I was going to give him a shout-out to Maze, Elisha, and of course, Dennis, our collective in-law. You know, and generally to every other new generation debater, both those in Nigeria and those in Ghana. I'm always excited to be amidst you guys and enjoy the fact that debating is marching forward. Thank you very much for the warm reception, Franco, and everyone else on Ocom. Okay. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Usual, we're going to be the team in the debate, right? And that's how come you're going to give us the win. But before I move into our extensions, I'm going to explain what our alternative is from closing government. This debate is an actor motion. What it means is that instead of all of the mechanistic quibbles that these guys have been bantering about all along, what we needed to identify is the character of the actors in themselves and whether or not that they are in the best position to take any action in this particular instance. So what that means, therefore, is that our alternative is a switch in the actor in themselves, right? What we think our alternative, a better alternative would be, is an intervention by the United Nations, right? What this looks like, for instance, is to say, and in fact, let me just give a reason why this is the best. Because notice that the biggest opposition to what comes out of opening government by themselves is to say, well, if you don't act now, you're likely to trigger Russia and China. They're likely to act before you. But the thing with the United Nations is that before you do any peacekeeping mission, or whether it's a dialogue or whatever, you are already going to get this approved by the United Nations Security Council. The thing with the UNSC is that it involves all of the warring parties already. So China, Russia, United States, United Kingdom are already permanent members, of this instance. So what it means is that they are in the best position to therefore devise a method that is likely to work. Why? Because even if they choose to go via, what's it called? Because these guys don't give you an actor. Even if they choose to go via dialogue, right? The thing is that the outcome of such dialogue is not one that is supposed to leave Sudan more plundered, because these guys already argue that the interest of these actors is personal. But when you have like Russia and the United States, for example, in the same meeting, right, what it means is that no one is able to allow the other person, take too much resources away from the state. At the end of the day, the winner becomes Sudan. But even if, an intervention through dialogue fails, we think that any form of, like a military action that is coordinated by the United Nations peacekeeping mission is one, again, that is likely to be one that prioritizes the interests of Sudan, not the interests of these states in themselves. Why? Because Russia will not allow USA take off all of the oil. USA will also not allow Russia to take all of that oil. At the end, United States becomes the biggest winner. If I stop here, we win. But let me go on. Next is on the issue of legitimacy, right? Legitimacy. When has an invasion been justified in the past, right? Out of all of these actors, US is the most invasive guy. So let's look at the United States. When they invaded Afghanistan, the reason was that it was a response to 9/11 attack, bomb attacks. When they invaded Syria, it was because they didn't invade Syria when the war started. It was until ISIS started claiming, regions within, Syria. That's when they invaded. So they felt like this was, an expansion of terrorism. When they invaded Iraq, because these guys were building weapons of mass destruction. At every point in time, whether the US is saying the truth or they're lying, their cover has always been that something is going on in this country that is likely to affect us. All of that three speeches don't show you why, even if this war continues and doesn't end, how does this affect the United States? They don't show you why that. And that's the only reason when the United States wants to attack, because the United States either attacks as a revenge or as a preemptive measure to prevent something that's going to spill over and affect the United States. There is no threat to the United States. Even if Sudan dies and crumbles and burns to the earth, it doesn't affect the United States. They're not their biggest trade partners. Their biggest trade partners are Russia and China. They're not, trading with them. They're not mining oil with them. They're not giving them aid and all sorts of things. They have literally no stakes in this country. Even if the state bonds, they don't have that interest. That's the reason why this doesn't occur well with the previous legitimacy arguments that the United States has. Why is that piece of framing important? Because then, when you go ahead to break your legitimate, when you go ahead to break that streak of legitimacy to say, well, we have been attacking when people have a threat against us. What you then do is that you then legitimize whatever is the backlash action from Russia and China, like they then talk about. Why is this so on two fronts? One, Russia already provides military support to Sudan through the sale of equipment and training of military personnel, and has been involved in mediating the peace process in Sudan. What it means ultimately is that Russia already wants to be the one who takes the glory for bringing peace in Sudan. When you therefore go ahead and invade, you are simply putting your hands in the eyes of Russia, saying that everything you are doing about negotiations has failed. Therefore, we're going to attack you. We're not going to allow you to be the one who brought peace, amongst Russia. China is a major infrastructural development partner, of Sudan. What it ultimately means, again, is that these guys already have high stakes in these instances. But even if you don't believe this to the extent that they're likely to join the war and make it expand, let me show you why US losing its legitimacy because you want to fight for Sudan causes you to lose the war on every other front. See, China and Russia, for instance, already have interest in Hong Kong. China, for example, has interest in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and Russia has interest in overtaking Ukraine. The only thing that is preventing these guys from acting is because you have a center-focused United States that is willing to stop them. when you commit enormous and humongous resources to fighting a war in Sudan, you leave all of that front open for these guys to then attack. They may not even come to you in Sudan to fight. What they do is that they say, well, US are then taking advantage and they're invading Sudan. Well, nothing stops me from invading Ukraine. Nothing stops me from taking over Taiwan and Hong Kong. So what you do is that at the end of the day, even if you win, best case scenario, even if you win in Sudan, right? Because you have allowed Russia create a new USSR. The losses you are going to gain in that kind of war that exists between you and a stronger Russia right now is one that's going to capitulate you. Anything you benefited from Sudan is going to be lost in that war because now you have a bigger and more empowered Russia and China in these instances. For the extension, but yes.
Yeah, so US still has dominance by a country like the US whatsoever. Even if you buy your world and they intervene, it is still the same US which want to intervene. That's still going to be painted by them.
This POI thoroughly ignores my last 5 minutes because I already explained to you that because you have Russia, China, and US sitting at the same table, you are likely to have any sort of deals that impact one person more than the other because of those interests. I think that takes care of you. The last bit of extension is the biggest one, right? The religious implication. Sudan is an Islamic country. Within the Islamic religious circles, Saudi Arabia and UAE are seen as the leaders, whose role it is to build up the Islamic race and not to tear it down. Any action that is backed by the UAE and Saudi Arabia is going to be considered as an internal rancor within Islam in and of itself. The impact of this is threefold. One, you transition this into becoming a religious war. That's how come you don't get victory on their side. Because religious wars don't end. Always. That's why Afghanistan lasted for 20 years. Because these guys no longer fight for the state. They are now fighting for their god or their deity. And the problem with these guys is that when you begin to fight those kind of war, any death, anybody that dies is seen as a martyr, and therefore they're able to recruit more individuals. Secondly, is that you break the group into splinter cells. So you have different sects within, Islam beginning to fight each other for dominance over that particular land. But thirdly, is that you hurt the religion itself. Saudi Arabia is the one who houses Medina and Mecca. Ultimately, these guys are the leadership of the religion. When you take an action that tears down the religion itself, it destroys the sanctity and the unification that Islam is already trying to build at this point. Right now, a lot of young people are transitioning to Islam and atheism. When Islam capitulates on itself, that hurts, the religion in itself. We are more than happy to win, even if this guy doesn't get peace.
If that, then they would have just given the trophy to OG and let us walk away from here. To the extent where we should, but secondly, I think this is like a more proper response. Secondly, all the things that they've characterized, at that particular time, the military advancement that Prosper talks to you about were less likely to be existent in that particular time. So in the instance of Saddam Hussein, in the instance of like Osama, all of these ones were untargeted, and so mass killings happened because of the lack of the military technology that Prosper tells you. We know what Prosper says to be true because USA had huge investment in those military technology, and they lead some of them that even we don't know like the full extent of their militarization and the technology that they'll be able to do. The only, I think the most recent one is like the attack that Trump did. Meaning that there are more nuanced ways to be able to fight this particular war. The reason why this particular becomes important, that for you to be able to get these particular persons to even talk with these guys argue they would, you need to show them that you are a bigger force than them, and you have the propensity not just to freeze their account, but to kill them targeted and kill all the persons involved in that particular. That's a bigger threat, and that's a bigger incentive to get them to even to the table to come and talk to you. Based on this, regardless of the response, we win. Let's engage these guys. They say, oh, you can let the UN do it. This is an ACTA motion. Knowledge about ACTA motion is that if the motion says Kojo will do X, the analysis should be Kojo will not do it or Kojo shouldn't do it. Not Kojo should go and tell patients to come and do this. So on that very premise, the alternative, like you said, secondly, unfair debate practice. You cannot flag in an alternative in your speech and leave these guys out. That's like very, very terrible way to be able to debate. But in the actual case that they bring, first of all, the USA only attacks when like there is a huge threat of war, and also, gives examples of that. A similar one, Prosper tells you about the uranium the resources that these guys particularly have. Secondly, Prosper tells you about how the USA has been engaging with them on the idea of terrorism and has been blacklisting them for sponsoring terrorism and even like removing them and putting them back on the blacklist. This even like fits into the whole idea of 9/11 and terrorism attack. So they have an interest, especially when the USA is the biggest interest in pushing like this particular like terrorism in this particular regard, right? So what this does, like what this analysis does against these guys here, is that what I think they talk about economic interest, etc. And that's fair, but we give you like very, very huge and dark consequential like harms that even beat these guys because they say we need to prove terrorist harms, etc. So we beat them on that particular crash. I've already engaged like the UN after example. The other thing that you need to know is the idea of Russia and China. I think now we all know that Russia is fighting a war. I don't think they have like enough like incentive and resources to be able to engage USA, that particular that. But secondly, the same thing is happening with China, especially because like Xi is struggling to maintain his authority and dominion in the CCP and how this has led and the COVID policy. All of these countries do not have as much to be able to engage within like with the USA. So the Cold War is most likely to be won by USA. Even if you agree that it will happen, we will still win that in that particular regard. I think the other thing that he mentions is that, well, Saudi and UAE coming in would mean that they are trying to make the war religious. I don't think the war gets changed overnight. So, first of all, the intent of Saudi and UAE is to restore peace, which also fits into his characterization of Islamic peace. But secondly, because these particular guys are fighting, UAE and Saudi coming in to restore peace, like doesn't automatically change the war from what it is to be about Islamic war, etc. But even that is true, we mean that these guys are already ready to fight, like Prosper tells you. And so for that same reason, we need to intervene and make a quick sweep that defeats these guys and put them on their toes. Before I engage, open question. Yes.
Apart from precedents, we show that they have accumulated a lot of resources. They have support from international actors like the Wagner Group and Russia, and they have an unsatisfied interest of being placed in the regular army. This means that they have access to anti-drone and any technology
exactly. So
that comes from Russia.
You target the people that are into these particular things and cut those particular resources and all of these things for people coming. It all exists in warfare. When you cut like resources, you try to say freeze their accounts. When you can freeze their accounts, you can also cut off all of those relationships and cripple them and attack them in that particular regard. What is guys, their biggest alternative is conversation. First of all, the problem with conversation is that conversations can happen even during invasions. We know this to be true because during the Russia-Ukraine conversation, Russia-Ukraine invasion, there are no cause for both particular parties to come to the table and talk in that particular regard. But the threat of war is even a bigger incentive for them to come apart from the freeze of accounts. They freeze accounts in wars. It's not an exclusive thing in that particular regard. But I think the difficult thing with their case that they fail to prove to you what kind of conversation they are going to be engaging. The reason why Zelensky doesn't want to engage with Vladimir is because he thinks that the deal, like Prosper tells you, is something that's unfavorable to him and he's going to lose. So because they don't propose the deal that would make sense for them to work, the only thing Papa says that, well, we are going to give my men free. Is that basically, Prosper tells you they've already talked about some of these things. It doesn't work in that regard. It doesn't work in that regard, yes. It doesn't work in that particular regard. The last thing you need to know is the idea of you become a warmonger, and that's particularly bad. Notice that the countries in the past have a fairly balanced amount of good image and particular bad image. To that extent, one specific action that they take does not usurp all the other things that they are doing. It doesn't cripple their businesses, it doesn't cripple like the amount of investment that they have coming to them in that particular regard. To that extent, it means that even like this particular thing, whether it goes right or wrong, does not change the perception we have, does not change the business that this particular have, and we are still most likely going to be like on the winning side in today's debate. One thing that you need to note about today's debate is that teams need to prove a higher amount of interest in that to be able to like beat and win anything. And secondly, to be able to argue out how this is necessarily going to work. You don't believe these guys because the alternative that they preach you is against the heart of that particular motion, and then they lose this particular debate because they're not able to like explain to you how this war would turn out to an Islamic war overnight, especially when these guys are coming in to bring peace and not to escalate the war by taking an action. Proudly say. Okay.
Am I audible enough?
Yeah, go large.
I think it's good enough. Sure. Okay, before I start, I would like to thank everybody being here and making the atmosphere at KDU a very lovely one and engaging. And I would also like to thank the CCDS members for coming out in their numbers to support. And I would thank the teams in the finals for making this engaging, even though they like to misquote the WDC manual a lot and lie. I can forgive them. So without further ado, I would like to start. 3, 2, 1. So, Kojo's current girlfriend and his ex-girlfriend are having a fight. This house, as Kojo would intervene and invade the ex's house and stop the fight, right? And we come from CG to tell you that, Kojo, if you invade your ex's place or whatever, your current girlfriend would say it means you still have feelings for your ex. She would say it means you never really loved her. She would say a lot of other shit that would directly come against you as Kojo. So do not invade, right? But since the fight going on between them is big enough, and people like your ex-girlfriend's mothers and your current girlfriend's mother and father are ready to bring about peace, sit back as Kojo and let them solve the problem, because your mother is like more of an argumentative person than you, and your mother will fix the problem. It is your interest as Kojo to sit back and do other things with your resources. It makes much more sense if you just link the fucking analogy, sorry for that, and not say, oh, part of WDC man or blah blah blah, act some motions like that. Come on. Anyways, starting, right? Because the only rebuttal you had to our brilliant extension is to say we are changing the WDC manual. We are not changing the manual. It's pretty simple. What is the extension from Izzy and how does that win us this debate? Much calmer than my previous finals over here at KU, because this has been a very easy win so far. You know why? Because Izzy tells you that if we stay back, right, the UN will probably take this action, or we can incentivize the UN to have a military intervention. It's not in our interest to do this. How does this beat open government? One, because open government tells you that the UK is losing allies. The USA is currently being painted as a warmongering fool who always wants to just fight wars that they want to lose. So just like they say, if you go ahead as the Quad and you go and invade, the US is portrayed as a warmongering idiot who just has enough money in their military-industrial complex and wants to invade wars in other continents that doesn't even pertain to them. But secondly, we think, as an impact of our extension, we give the biggest interest that US could care about right now, which is sustaining vital countries like Ukraine. You know why? Because the USA and the countries in the Quad don't have unlimited resources. If you invade Sudan, that means resources that are being sent to Ukraine on that front have to be diverted. For example, I'll talk to you about how it affects the Saudis and also, right? But what this means, for example, is that one, Ukraine cannot battle up against Russia anymore because those supplies stop coming because you're stupidly fighting in Sudan, a war that doesn't even concern you. Why is it bad if Ukraine falls? Two reasons. Because one, if Ukraine falls to Russia, then Russia extends their power and control in Europe, and they get to stand up against USA and flex muscles against them. This is the biggest interest that USA wants to protect right now. This is a tiny country, put that in Africa. But the second reason is that Ukraine is in the European Union, and you protecting their sustenance as the biggest member of Quad gives you access into European markets, and it gives you access far larger than what Sudan could ever give you, right? Let's take out CG then, apart from giving like the brilliant analysis that shoots Kojo's shitty response to our external. Prosper tells you three things that unnecessarily proves the success of their invasion. One, the USA has losers fatigue, they don't want to lose anymore. Two, Biden's election is coming up, so for some reason he would miraculously win the invasion. Three, the US has tech and drones, so they would win the invasion. First of all, if all of these things are true, the UN will probably have a little bit more than all of these things that he talks about, making the invasion even much more perfect if the UN does it, and we don't fuck ourselves so well by doing it. But each targeted responses, here is why the invasion will not win. Because Eze gave him a POI that he rubbished. You don't say you are going to win the invasion because you analyze US's strength and you ignore factors that can come up on the side of Sudan, because war isn't a one-party activity. For example, one, the USA has losers fatigue, right? This is because, why do they keep losing their past invasion? because they have changes in government, and whenever a Republican president switches to a Democratic president, they decide not to fund those wars anymore because they think it's senseless. So if Biden leaves office, the next US president can decide not to continue your invasion, you continue your useless fatigue, right? But the second reason about Biden's election, I think it's quite pointless because it doesn't show why Biden would want to win, because at best it's the Secretary of Defense and the General of Defense that does this war. But when they say US has tech and drones, the point is US have always had tech and drones. When they invaded Pakistan and Afghanistan, those countries were no larger and bigger than Ghana, but US still somehow managed to fumble and bottle the lead like Arsenal. What this means is that if you are still going to invade them with your high-tech drones, you might lose. But you won't even lose because Russia will have an incentive to supply Sudan these resources that they need to stand up against you and prolong the invasion. But the invasion will again be prolonged for the reason because you change it into a religious war. The religious war part is what caters for the Saudi and the UAE part in the Quad. Because you might say, Fiji only talked about UK and USA. We think in the Quad you have UAE and these guys also being in there. The best interest these guys get is that they make sure that Islam continues to become a religion globally that is bonded together. You look all around you and people are living Christianity and people are fracturing away, breaking away. It doesn't make no sense for UAE and Saudi Arabia practicing Sunni Islam, that form of Islamic, to also just jump up into another country in Africa that doesn't even concern them, who are also practicing Islam, and just invade them just like that. At the end of the day, while we are waiting over our opening, it's because they give you the most basic case you could ever get. You want diplomacy, shooting people is bad, killing people is bad. Like, realistically, the debate from these guys show you that like an action probably needs to be taken. What they don't show you is why our actor can better protect their interest if they don't take the step of invading. Guys, it's common sense. You cannot say we are forcing the option on these guys that they have to defend the diplomacy these guys pointed out. Because AZ's first POI ever was to Franco, who just unwisely said, shut up, come and defend what these guys said. He flagged the POI to you to say, you cannot force us to say we have to defend diplomacy because it's an ACTA motion, and you can say the ACTA would sit back and the UN would probably do this invasion anyways. Like, this is a very easy RR motion. Vote CG, include a YC decision.